Erin grew up in Salt Lake City. She earned a BS from Hampshire College in Amherst, Massachusetts, as well as a master's and doctorate in instructional technology and learning science from Utah State University. Please welcome Erin Brewer.
Well, I just want to say thank you, and I've been really surprised by how few organizations have been willing to talk about this, and I feel like it's such an important issue because it has to do with the health and well-being of our children. So thank you for being here. The title of this is There Are No Trans Children. There are children with gender dysphoria, and there's a big difference. The trans activists are trying to say that there is such a thing as an inherently transgender child, and that's just not the case. Sorry. Can you hear me now? So I wanted to just say I feel like a fish out of water. This is me for the 2016 election. I was in the Cash Democrat parade. I was a delegate for Bernie Sanders at the state convention. So I am new to a lot of these kind of organizations, conservative organizations, because for some reason the left won't even address these issues. And so a lot of us who formerly thought of ourselves as liberals are now finding friends and allies in groups that we never thought that we would participate with. So thank you. Thank you for taking on this topic, because I feel like it's so important. And it's a topic that can bring liberals and conservatives together, I think, once people have the information they need. So I wasn't aware of this issue until I got this letter from Equality Utah. And the reason I got the letter is that I previously donated to Equality Utah. I had been a strong supporter of LGBTQ rights, and so I was on their mailing list. And I started to read this letter, and I had a visceral response. I started shaking as I realized what this letter was talking about. What they were saying is they were going to introduce legislation that would prevent therapists from helping children like I was who had gender dysphoria. And so I contacted Equality Utah on their Facebook page, and I made some comments saying, how can you include gender dysphoria in this legislation? How can you mandate that the therapist would have to affirm a child's thought that they were the opposite gender? And they blocked me. And then I went to one of their events in Salt Lake and tried to talk to Troy Williams, who's the director of Equality Utah, and they called security on me. So I'm no longer donating to Equality Utah, and I am talking about this legislation and other things that are happening to children as a result of the LGBTQ movement. As you can see, the one picture is me in kindergarten. I was a happy little kid, a little bit different. I had some learning disabilities and was a little bit creative. The next picture is from when I was in first grade. Between the summer of kindergarten and first grade, I was sexually assaulted, and I developed gender dysphoria. At the time, I had no idea that's why I wanted to be a boy. I just knew that I was going to make sure that nothing like that sexual assault ever happened to me. And I didn't see it happening to my brother, so I decided I was going to be a boy. So I did everything I could to be a boy. And in my mind, I was a boy. This is a letter that my mother wrote to my father after a meeting with the school psychologist and the teacher. The school psychologist in first grade at Howard R. Drake's elementary school told her I wanted to be a boy. And they didn't really know why. They just knew I was aggressive and I was acting differently, and something was very wrong. And I can only thank God, I guess, thank heaven, thank the school psychologist, that she didn't suggest to my mom that I transition because I was a trans child. Instead, she acknowledged that I had some psychiatric issues that I needed help with. And I am so thankful for that. So what is gender dysphoria? What does it mean when they talk about a child being trans? It means that they have this condition, and it's in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual from the American Psychiatric Association. And it basically is a strong desire to be of the opposite sex. And children want to be with playmates of the opposite sex. They want to wear clothes of the opposite sex. They want to engage in activities of the opposite sex. They have a strong dislike for their own gendered anatomy and would like to look like the other gender. So this is the diagnostic criteria. And if you look at it, a lot of kids fall into this criteria. A lot of tomboys would fall into this criteria. A lot of more feminine boys would fall into this. So this is a really broad way of diagnosing somebody with gender dysphoria. And it doesn't mean that they're transgender. It means that for whatever reason, they want to be the opposite sex. And it's a mental health issue. And as you can see from this, there are lots and lots of reasons why people develop gender dysphoria. Borderline personality disorder, Munchausen syndrome, where a parent decides that their child is transgender. I just read a post the other day where a woman said that her child was transgender from birth. That is not a child who has gender dysphoria. That's a child who has been groomed by their parents to be a transgender child for whatever reason. So there are all sorts of causes. I just want to talk about a few. A lot of kids with gender dysphoria have developed it because of a sexual assault. I am in touch with a lot of children, a lot of grown-ups who as children were sexually assaulted and either socially transitioned or medically transitioned, and then after some therapy discovered that their gender dysphoria was a result of a sexual assault. And it makes sense. If you're sexually assaulted, you want to do everything you can to distance yourself from your body. Another cause is homophobic parents who think that their child is a gay or lesbian. So they decide that instead of their child being gay or lesbian, they'll transition them so they'll present as a straight person. Some parents prefer the opposite gender. My stepdad was more than happy to have me be his son. He took me rifle shooting and BB gun shooting. He took me to paint houses with him and do yard work. He loved having me sort of as his son. He didn't talk about it in that way because it was before this kind of narrative came about. But he was more than happy to encourage me to be engaging in activities that are typically more masculine. Autism, they're finding out that children who are on the autism spectrum have a huge rate of gender dysphoria. Some have suggested that I'm on the autism spectrum. I don't know if you can tell, but it took me, I was very stressed out. The most thing I was stressed out about today was what to wear, because I wear the same thing every day. I have different, I have 8 different shirts like this, and I have 8 different leggings like this, and I have a couple of skirts that I usually wear that are a little grungy, and then this is my dressiest skirt that I have, and I've never worn high heel shoes, so for me, presenting as feminine is really hard, and I really struggle, and that's some of that could be from issues involving not being on the autism spectrum, or just having kind of a quirky personality. But I was just listening to a podcast, and it was somebody from a gender clinic, and she felt that almost 100% of the girls who came in there suffered from autism, were on the autism spectrum. So they were all suffering from autism, which is, if this is true, then we're completely denying these children appropriate mental health services. There are children who are gender nonconforming, who just prefer certain colors or certain ways of dress. And that doesn't make them male or female. It just means that they have a preference for a certain way of dressing. There's a lot of research out now talking about social contagion. And Lisa Littman recently did a study in which she showed that a lot of girls will develop gender dysphoria after a friend of theirs develops gender dysphoria. So it happens in groups. So one girl gets it, then another girl gets it, then another girl gets it. And puberty, believe it or not, can cause gender dysphoria. There are trans activists who will tell girls who are having cramps with their periods that maybe they're transgender. Or girls who are uncomfortable as their bodies change from being a girl to a woman, that they're transgender, and encourage them to take testosterone. So this is a serious problem. Trans activists are also actively undermining parents. They are creating support groups and surrogate families for children who have parents who aren't willing to accept the idea that their child is transgender. They are also using emotional blackmail. Equality Utah has said a number of times that if conversion therapy isn't found, that children will kill themselves. They say that if children aren't allowed to transition, they will kill themselves. And this is emotional blackmail. And it's simply not proven. There's no good research to justify these claims in any way. There is good research that shows that if you alienate children from their families, they're going to have poor outcomes. So the suicide claim that Equality Utah has made to justify their ban of conversion therapy is based on one study. And this study had nothing to do with gender identity, and it had nothing to do with talk therapy. Conversion therapy, most of us think about conversion therapy being like being electrocuted or having to take medicine that makes you nauseous so that you don't want to do something. It's very behavioral. But Equality Utah wants to ban any therapy that in which a therapist would challenge a child's gender dysphoria and say, maybe there are other reasons other than that you've been born in the wrong body, that you have gender dysphoria. So the flaws of this study are many. One is the inclusion criteria. It was all self-selected. The study was specifically given to people at gay bars and other LGBTQ resource centers. It was a retrospective design, which means that the participants self-reported on their childhoods. And we know that self-reporting is not particularly accurate. The study focus was actually on parents rejecting behavior of gay children. So it really had nothing to do with gender identity even. And the results were questionable. So even Ryan herself says we cannot rule out the possibility that those who were most maladjusted as young adults retrospectively attributed parental behaviors during adolescence as an attempt at changing their sexual orientation. She admits that those who are most damaged by their childhoods are likely children who grew up with and were just angry about their situations, who were not well-adjusted kids. And this is something that happens with gender dysphoria too, that children who have gender dysphoria usually have another diagnosis along with it, anxiety or depression or autism. They happen in clusters. And so we can't attribute higher suicide rates among one population and just say it's because of one thing when we haven't looked at all the factors. The other thing that they're not telling you is that around 80% of children with gender dysphoria will have that dysphoria naturally resolved if they progress through puberty. This is huge. This means that these children, if left and supported by their children without transitioning, will grow up to be happy, functional, and comfortable in their own bodies. And to me, this is huge, 80%. Unfortunately, transgender activists want children to transition, and they're trying to get society to accept transitioning as a normal developmental process for some children. Transitioning encourages a child to believe that there is something wrong with their body. They're basically teaching children to hate their bodies. They're saying there's something so wrong with your body that you have to change it completely. It's also not an effective treatment for gender dysphoria. As it turns out, transitioning does not stop feelings of dysphoria. In fact, sometimes it makes it worse because children who transition keep trying harder and harder and harder to be something that they're not and something that they can't ever be. And they go to extremes to try and make their bodies look like what they want it to look like rather than to accept who they are. Once a child is socially transitioned, they are much more likely to persist with their gender dysphoric feelings. So a watch and wait approach where a child is supported and given therapy to talk about their issues will result in 80% of children desisting with gender dysphoric feelings. If a child transitions as a child, they are much more likely to grow up and want to first socially and then medically transition. So transitioning is actually not a treatment for gender dysphoria. It's a way of encouraging gender dysphoria. Once a child socially transitions, they are far more likely to medically transition. So I wanted to talk a little bit about social transitioning, and I'm a little bit worried that this might be uncomfortable for some people in this audience. As you mentioned, some of the things that people see now make them feel uncomfortable. But I think sometimes we have to feel a little bit uncomfortable in order to understand what is happening. So first I brought this. This is actually something that trans activists encourage boys who believe that they're female to wear in their pants to give them what's called a camel toe, to make them look like they have female parts instead of male parts. So this is socially transitioning. Socially transitioning isn't just allowing your child to wear more feminine or more masculine clothes. This is called a packer. This is designed for children under 5 years old. This is marketed to children under 5 years old for them to put in their panties so that they can feel more like a boy. The other thing is breast binding, and breast binding is something they encourage girls to do, which is compressing their breasts often to the point that girls have a hard time breathing. These are damaging behaviors. These are things that are harmful physically and psychologically. So socially transitioning isn't just about a child dressing in the way that they're comfortable. It's indoctrinating them into a lifestyle. And once a child socially transitions, they're far more likely to medically transition. In fact, insurance companies are now starting to pay for these kind of medical transitionings. They start kids on puberty blockers as young as 8 years old. I don't know how many of you have had or have 8-year-olds at home, but 8-year-olds have magical thinking. They're not even able to understand the idea of permanence, that if they take this medication, it's going to permanently cause changes within their body. It's going to make their healthy body dysfunctional. They also are starting to give cross-gender hormones to children as young as 8 years old. There's a study in California now where they're starting to provide these cross-gender hormones to children before they even go through natural puberty. And then there's surgery. So puberty blockers are experimental. They've never been designed to be given to children with gender dysphoria. They are used for a couple of different things, none of which is stopping a child from developing normally. It has not been approved for use of gender dysphoria with the FDA or manufacturers. We know some of the long-term impacts. There are emotional and developmental delays. Bone growth is delayed, height and sex organ development is delayed, and body shape is changed. We don't know how much of this is permanent, and we don't know how much of this is reversible. There's also an increase in self-harming behaviors, which makes sense because a child who gets put on puberty blockers is being told by doctors and their parents and society that they were born in the wrong body. So no wonder they're feeling self-harm, because there's nothing more powerful than telling somebody that they are born in the wrong body. There's also a shockingly high rate of persistence. There was one study done in England in which children who were on puberty blockers, 100% of them went on to medically transition. So they talk about puberty blockers as being a way to delay puberty, but really what it is a way to start medically transitioning children. Cross-gender hormones cause all kinds of problems. They cause the body to become dysfunctional. They cause the sex organs to atrophy. Some of these do reverse, many of them don't. Most girls who take testosterone lose the capacity to reproduce permanently. They will never be able to have children. Most girls who take testosterone will have facial hair growth that will be permanent and changes to their voice that will be permanent. Males who take estrogen are likely to be infertile. Their genitals actually atrophy and sometimes become very tender, almost like infantile, and they develop breasts like women. We don't know what the effects of giving a child cross-gender hormones is. So we know that puberty blockers are bad, but we have no idea what happens when we give children cross-gender hormones because it's never been done before. These children are guinea pigs. And we do know that it's making their functional body permanently dysfunctional. Cross-gender surgery, which is now also increasingly being covered by insurance companies. For males, they will create a vaginal opening. They will often remove the testicles and the penis. They shave the vocal cords to take away the Adam's apple, so they actually go in there and scrape it. Breast implants. Men will often have facial feminization surgery, so they'll chip away at the bones in their face to make them look more feminine. Girls, and I want to emphasize this, girls as young as 13 are getting permanent double mastectomies. They're having their breasts amputated at 13 years old. Then they're going on and having phalloplasty. So breast augmentation, this is what it looks like. A lot of males who want breast implants want really big breasts because that's how they're defining being feminine. And as a woman, I find this really offensive because women should not be defined by their cleavage. These are two girls who had gender dysphoria together and both had their breasts amputated. They don't even have nipples anymore. They are permanently disfigured. And I have a content warning on the next slide because it's kind of gruesome. It is, so if you don't want to see it, look away. This is what happens when a girl decides to have a penis made of herself. They remove the flesh on her forearm to create a penis, and then they take flesh from her leg to do a skin graft on her arm. This is hugely invasive. People die from this. So the other thing that transitioning does is it reinforces the view to parents, children, and society that it's possible to be born in the wrong body. And this fellow here, a lot of people think he's joking around, and he's not. This is a gender non-conforming person right here named Dusty, and he has been gender non-conforming for much of his life, and he genuinely believes that he should be allowed in women's spaces where they're vulnerable. If the Equality Act is passed, he will be allowed in spaces where women are vulnerable, where children are vulnerable, and there's nothing we'll be able to do about it. So this has huge implications, not just for children, but for society as a whole. So what I want the message, kind of the take-home message to be, is that children with gender dysphoria deserve appropriate mental health services. And if Equality Utah passes its conversion therapy ban, children with gender dysphoria will not be allowed to get appropriate mental health services. I have friends in Washington where they passed a conversion therapy ban, and they send their kids to Utah to get therapy because they don't want therapists who are going to tell the child that they were born in the wrong body, to tell the parents that they have to accept that their child was born in the wrong body, to tell the schools that the child was born in the wrong body and therefore has to be treated as the opposite sex. They deserve to love themselves. If a child is told that they're born in the wrong body and transition, the underlying issues that cause the gender dysphoria in the first place will not ever be addressed. That child will never get the kind of services they need. They will never be able to love themselves because always in the back of their mind is the message that they got from doctors and teachers and parents and society that there is something wrong with their body. They deserve a chance to resolve their gender dysphoria. And if children are transitioned, the chances that that will resolve go way down. Again, 80% of children with gender dysphoria have their gender dysphoria resolved if they're allowed to naturally progress through puberty. So when I look at this, when I read that letter from Equality Utah, when I hear about children who are transitioning, when I see announcements about an LGBT club in our local community, I ask myself, when I was 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 years old, would I have transitioned if I had been given the opportunity? And the answer is yes. In a heartbeat, I would have transitioned. I know this because I hated my body so much and I hadn't identified all the reasons why I was dysphoric. I would have transitioned in a heartbeat. And I am so thankful that I did not, because I have a beautiful family. I have 3 amazing kids that I would not have if I had been transitioned. So I want to thank the school psychologist when I was a child for talking about ways to manage my gender dysphoria. And I want children who are alive today, who are in our schools, who are in our communities, to have the opportunity to have their gender dysphoria resolved so that they can grow up and learn to love themselves and learn to love their body and to know that there isn't anything wrong with their body. They just have some issues that they need to resolve. Sorry. I honestly did not want children. I went to the doctor when I was in high school and asked if they could tie my tubes because I did not like children. And my children are the most important thing in the world to me now. And so I am coming here in front of you in a community I never thought I would find anything in common with. And I'm thanking you for standing up for children. And I hope that you will continue to fight for children, because these children have mental health issues and they deserve to have their gender dysphoria resolved.